Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Hadith Tonight. This is the second segment of the program. As we said in the introduction, we're going to be talking about the crisis in Libya. This is a part of a series where we've been looking at various crises in the Middle East. We've talked about Syria, Yemen. Most recently, we talked about Iraq. Today, we turn our attention to Libya. We're joined by political science professor, also professor of strategic studies, and he also sits as a member of Egyptian Scholars. This is an advisory council here in Egypt. Professor emaad.muhanna, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Welcome to Hadith Tonight. So this situation in Libya, we were just chatting a little bit. It's very different from the other crises that we've talked about because there are two competing rival governments in the country. Can you talk more about how do you describe the situation in Libya?
It is very complex, as you kindly mentioned, because it's not just the revolution and ouster of Muammar Gaddafi. It's not just a civil war, and it's not just a place for crimes and terrorism that attracted the attention of the international community. It's a complex of all that, and now recently we've got Daesh also becoming party to this conflict. It started all in 1969 on the 1st of September when Muammar Gaddafi became the sole leader or the de facto leader after leading a group of young military personnel and started to lead the revolution against King Idris. From that time, for about 4 decades, he became the sole leader. The country was going from bad to worse economically, if you like. The forbidden political parties, banning all oppositions, etc. And in 2011, as part of the Arab Spring, the same wave started to appear or break out in Libya. It took a few months, and from that on we started to see the attention of international community because of the attack on some major cities like Tripoli and basically some other north cities. And the world was worried about a mass killing in those particular areas. So we found the NATO intervention in those areas, which basically led from that into the civil Libyan war. From that, we started to see also the capture when the International Criminal Court issued a warrant of arrest to Muammar Gaddafi. By that time, he was captured and killed in Libya by the rivals. From that, we started to see the rise of tribal troops, the Muammar Gaddafi pro troops, military and security personnel, and escalated by the day. Recently found Daesh is also becoming party to this, threatening not just the Libyan community but also the western border of Egypt, which basically aggravated the Egyptian army to attack them by the time they assassinated 27 Christian men in Libya at the time. So it is really very difficult, and at this moment you find a lot of troops, a lot of groups involving tribes, involving military personnel, security personnel, international community playing a role, Daesh, some moderate people, some government officials. So it is very complicated at this point.
Yeah, very. And we also want to remember the Ethiopians. A week after the 23 or so Egyptian Copts were killed, there were 30 Ethiopian Christians who were also killed by Daesh. I want to ask you, remind me, at what point was the U.S. Embassy, was it Benghazi? Was that before or after I forget the timeline. Was that
it's before the NATO. It's okay. Before the NATO, which one of the reasons that basically aggravated the international community, worried about Benghazi is a major city, so they worried about mass killing that might take place in those particular
and
areas.
The U.S. ambassador was killed.
The embassy in Benghazi was bombed, followed by another, United Nations and some international community. Other foreigners were captured. We were talking about at that time about 1.5 million Egyptians at that time. A lot of them were were captured and basically surrounded in many areas, as well as Tunisians, Ethiopians, and other Arabs.
Yeah, yeah. You know, when we started to hear about Khalifa Haftar, this general that served under Gaddafi, can you talk more about him? I understand that he was in exile. He originally was with Gaddafi, then switched. He left, went to the U.S. and came back.
It's just adding up to the complexity of the matter. But as you said, he was in exile, he came back, and he led by the support of some Arab countries, because the Arab League was trying to play a role, but they can't play a direct role in resolving the issues, because tribes are basically refusing to stand down and have a united Libya. So you can hear now about separate provinces for different tribes. So Haftar basically led the campaign of the dignity of Libya. That's what was called, by the support of some Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, trying to bring back peace and stability into the country.
There was a lot of hope and expectation in Haftar.
Because of the collapse at the time. That time there was no government, there were different groups, rise of tribes. So it became really very difficult for the international community and for the Arab League to take a side. So there was a hope, as you said, that Haftar will be able to unite people under him and bring peace and stability in there.
Not just outside Libya, but even Libyans themselves were demonstrating. They were having pro-Haftar. You know, there's all this expectation, but then...
Those are the simple Libyans that just want to have a peaceful life. But the others that want to get involved in, making the wealth and dominating the power in Libya, because you had a power vacuum after the collapse of the Libyan government and the capture of Gaddafi. You had a power vacuum in those particular days, and basically the simple Libyan citizens basically couldn't really live. A lot of them were forced to take sides with the other rivals, so it became very difficult. So the hope was there after the rise of Haftar or his return, to basically unite people and try to lead a pro-military campaigns to basically clean up what has happened of the chaos during that time. But until now, he's not really able to unite the Libyans, especially after the appear of Daesh, because Daesh now, they control a lot of cities. A lot of tribes also have their own militias. So it is becoming very difficult, and you can see that Haftar, even with the heavy military, they're focusing on a number of cities, but he's not able to control the entire Libya.
Yeah, that's disappointing. I remember just recently he was here in Cairo. He was meeting with some, I don't know what the contents and the purpose of that meeting was, but the thing that signaled to me that all control had been lost was when one of these groups started exporting oil independently.
Yes.
And I believe there was a U.S. Naval SEAL team that intercepted the tanker after it left and forced it back.
It basically, as we said, it's just a control of resources, and the same thing is happening in Iraq, and you find that Daesh groups that control certain areas are basically controlling the wealth of that area, and we've seen they were selling the barrel for $15 at the time. That's probably less now, because the international price has come down to about 23. So they're probably selling the barrel for about $5. So this is the problem again with revolutions. When you have a collapse of a political regime followed by the government, you find that basically the rivals or the militias are controlling not just the cities, not just the political systems, but also the economic resources, which basically affect directly the poor citizens in those regions. You find that they're affecting also the supply of food and all sorts of life in their transportation, roads, food, education, health, in hospitals. So this is really becoming very difficult for the Libyans. We took in tens of thousands of people in casualties, over 5,000 people killed. The collapse of security forces in there, and it's becoming just pieces of or militias all over the place.
So among all the various factors, the presence of Daesh, the rival governments, what would you rank, how would you rank the most obstructive factor to ending this situation?
I think the most obstructing factor, it's not just in Libya, but it's the entire Arab world, which is poverty or the cultural erosion of the proper, soft, peace-loving Arabs, supported by ignorance, high illiteracy rate, selfishness of politicians, I think. But if you look at the two main factors that are always the obstacle in any new democratic building, basically, is the illiteracy on the ground level, or ignorance, and the selfishness of politicians. And you find that basically in Iraq, the selfishness of rulers with the ignorance of the people themselves. They're not able to select right. They're not able to take sides on the right power or the right troop or the right leader to bring peace and stability again. And this is all caused by long ruling of politicians. You find 30 years under Mubarak, 40 years under Gaddafi, the same with Saddam Hussein, the same with Hafiz al-Assad and Bashar. So these long ruling decades are basically full of injustice, closing of proper or downgrading the education system, the disappearance of talents, people in the migrating, basically opposing to any or forbidding any opposition whatsoever. So there is no political development in those particular places. And when the revolution or the Arab Spring started, it was basically hammered by ignorance more than opposition. So the people that actually opposed the Arab Spring, so if we remind the viewers on the Arab Spring, it was just a rise against injustice, asking for social justice, basically asking for more freedom. So they're all legitimate reasons to push for a revolution. But what you found that soon, 6 months to 12 months, the entire Arab Spring revolutions are all collapsed. We saw this in Egypt, going back into the same system. We saw that in Iraq, we saw that in Syria, and basically here in Libya it's taken a different turn. So the fact here is that people were made that way, and therefore they're not able to rule themselves.
Basically, thank you. What I hear you saying is that the long duration of these rulers is a part of the problem that we're seeing now.
Exactly.
There was a destruction of the political system, the intellectual life, the freedom to express and all this thing.
And for the country to develop not just economically or politically, but also creative thinking is not there. So if you look at illiteracy, for example, you're talking about over 80% of Libyans are illiterate. You're talking in Egypt about 42%.
Did you say 80%?
Yes. So you're talking about a high illiteracy rate in those countries. Therefore, it is very difficult to build a political model, because first of all, when you get these people into the actual voting, they don't know how to vote. Number two, they don't have the proper criteria on how to vote. They don't have a proper means and criteria to select their own leaders. They don't know how. So in Egypt it's the same. It's about 42% literacy rate. So we're talking about the Egyptian population, the largest in the Middle East, is basically 50%, almost of them can't read and write. So that's part of the problem. And just to remind people how this difficult is, in 1981, when Mubarak took over the rule after the assassination of Sadat, the number of illiterate people in 1981, out of population of 42 million, you're talking about 7 million Egyptians, about 19%, 7 million. Now you're talking about over 40 million.
It's more than
so you
double.
actually, that's 5 times. Poverty rate was 22%, almost about 8 million. Now you're talking about over 40 million. So you're talking about nations that are actually going backwards. Therefore, when you have a group of youth basically pushing for revolution, for more freedom, there is no support on the ground level.
Right.
So therefore, I always find that ignorance and literacy are always the largest obstacle or the biggest obstacle to development, because they don't understand so they can help you. They're actually stopping against you.
What you're saying, I mean, in terms of these extremely high illiteracy
Absolutely.
rates, they take us back to
50s and 60s, and they were even
far, yeah,
they were far better than that, and therefore I think number one for the Arab Spring or the entire Arab system to develop and be able to be a powerful nation to support the entire Islamic world, I think number one, we need to work on the education system, long-term education system, because we have a totally destroyed education system throughout the Arab world. The Gulf areas, they have the money, but there is no proper education systems in there. Or relying a lot on the Western society. In Africa, North Africa, you find there's a poverty and also poor education system. So I think this is number one. If the Arabs want to have a solution, a proper solution long term on all problems they face, not just on the terrorism or international intervention, education. Number two is the cultural rebuilding of the old cultures they already had. You have a lot of mixing up cultures and a mix between traditions and what's culture and what's tradition, basically, that people develop over the years.
So the nominal Libyan finds themselves in the middle of a struggle between, or being forced to choose between armed groups that are legitimate forces, but then also there's a question about who exactly is legitimate.
That's right.
And then there are armed forces using Islam.
That's right.
You know, saying that we are right because we're with Islam. And how do they make it? How do you choose?
This is the difficulty. And between the two groups, you find a wide, let's say, an area or a gap that is basically questioned by loyalty. Who's actually loyal? Because the fact here is, it is, if you talk about the military personnel or security personnel, people themselves know a lot of them were corrupt, because that's how Gaddafi ruled Libya. So, for example, if you talk about the situation in Egypt or in Syria or in Iraq, why a lot of people are not pro the army, or a lot of people are not pro the security personnel? Because these are the people that supported Mubarak in his rule. So you actually question their integrity, you question their intention.
This is what they said about Haftar. They say,
exactly.
Oh, he's just old Gaddafi's regime.
Exactly, exactly. So this is, again, it's a hammering the fact that people will go pro Haftar. On the military, on the Islamic side, there's again a mix between what's tribal or Libyan and what is Islamic overall. And you find Daesh is playing that, the same thing that was played in Egypt or even in Iraq. And on top of that, you find that tribes also having their own militias. So you have a struggle between three main areas. Number one, military and security personnel.
Okay.
Number two, the pro-religion or pro-Islam militias. And number three, the tribal militias.
Okay.
So you're talking about citizens, normal citizens, which basically based on blood. So blood closeness, and then you find religious ideology, and you find the political or the pro-military. So between the three of them, I think the Libyans are really struggling to choose. And this is again because of illiteracy, ignorance, and the marginalization that took place, because people were away from politics. And the same thing was said in Egypt. Why Egyptians can't choose a right when it came to parliament? Because they never knew how to choose. They never knew how to select. They never had the criteria. They never given the freedom to choose. And therefore, it's a learning curve. So unfortunately, for the entire Arab world, it's a learning curve. It's going to take us a long time, between 20 to 30 years, to actually get people or get the right generation to be able to choose right and lead right.
So some critics, in terms of this United Nations effort to establish a unity government, would say that they're trying to force and ram down a situation that is not organic.
Yes.
And the ones that they're working with, the United Nations, are these rival governments. To what extent have they included any of these other groups, the tribal groups or the groups using religion to motivate people? Are they completely marginalized and they're only working with the rival governments, or are some of them?
No, the peace talks include all parties, but it is the difficulty here because they're not almost on the same direction. The tribes want a division of Libya. They wanted a federal ruling.
They want to split it in two parts, right?
Exactly.
North and south, is that?
No, it's three. And in some cases 4, because you've got Western troops, you've got what's called the Zantan, and you've got other troops. You've got a military side, and you've got Daesh that controlling a lot of the coast towns. So it's breaking up into pieces, and you really can't gather them to run into the same direction. If all troops are going for united Libya, it would have been easier, because we're all going for united Libya, yet it's how to do it is going to be, the talk is going to be about that, and how to do it. But the actual fact, you and I are not agreeing even on united Libya. So you wanted united Libya, I wanted it to be divided. Yeah. And therefore, there is no middle point between all the groups. As you said, United Nations trying to work with the most legitimate group, really, because after the collapse in Libya, and this is happening in all Arab countries after the Arab Spring, except Egypt, because in Egypt the army took over and it became legitimate organization to talk on behalf of the country. But in Libya, it's not the same.
When you say the legitimate government, you mean the one that was removed from Tripoli to Tobruk in the east? Is that the internationally recognized government?
Yes.
And the one now in Tripoli is the one that rose up against.
Yeah. Okay. So add to that Daesh, because Daesh here is not all of them internationally brought in. A lot of them are Libyans. They actually established, I think in November 2014, the Daesh branch or a chapter in Libya was officially announced, and therefore you've got Libyans under Daesh, and you've got Libyans under the tribal ideology, and you've got Libyans under the army and the security, and you've got Libyans are basically rivals that don't believe in the three of them. Yeah. So it is becoming very difficult, and I think United Nations is trying to work with the most legitimate one, probably the one in the east, and get the others to agree on basic principles as a ground for talk, for peace talks.
But then there was a problem with the UN rapporteur, Leon Bernardino.
Yes.
He was accused of being an illegitimate broker because the Arab, was it the Emirates or Qatar, I forget which Gulf state it was offering him a job.
No, it was Qatar.
Qatar.
Yeah. So again, here is another situation, and I don't think an international community will be able to resolve the issue. I think it's going to have to go back to the Arab League here, because the international community talks are really based on certain political and international principles. But I think the Arab talk will be different. Here we're talking to Arab tribes. We're talking about the Muslims getting involved in principles, so you can get people closer in the talks rather than talking them on international principles.
What progress, what steps has the Arab League made so far? Have they been successful?
No, not at all. They actually left it right from the beginning. They left it to the international community, the NATO. Before that, we had some talks about the international intervention led by Egypt, Emirates, and Saudi Arabia to basically try to bring peace and stability in there, because they were worried that Egypt is a large country, and they were worried it will basically be a host for terrorism groups, and from there it's going to start to move into North Africa, and becomes really very difficult to control it, because they all over the place and in a vast land. And I think that also failed. From that we saw the NATO get involved, and I think NATO didn't even resolve it, because some of it was accused of killing civilians and not bombing the right people. So it is very difficult, but unfortunately this is the only way to go, is to go back to the Arab Leagues. And as we said in previous episodes, I think the Arab League is also busy with its own problems in terms of structure, in terms of voting. We said before that the actual declaration of the Arab League does not allow a voting system, or provide a voting system, number one, to get a majority of the Arabs pro or against something. Number two is the actual unified army, which can resolve this issue. So it is very difficult, but it's the only way.
We should bring up the issue of this record number of people who have crossed the Mediterranean primarily through Libya.
That's right.
Because it's the shortest distance across the Mediterranean. Who are these human traffickers? Who are they aligned with? Are they aligned with, obviously they're working with somebody on the ground in Libya.
Yes.
Who are they working with?
I think it's very difficult to ascertain who's really leading that, but it's definitely money making of human trafficking. Part of it through the labor migration from Central Africa, not just the Arabs, Central Africa through Egypt or through Libya, and then crossing either east to Israel, because part of them are actually going through Libya into Sinai through the tunnels into Israel. And that part has really basically been reduced quite a lot after closing the tunnels in Egypt or between Egypt and Gaza. So this is becoming very difficult, and therefore a lot of these traffickers are actually moving west to go through Libya into Italy, and basically a lot of money paid for that. It's a real human trafficking, more than what we heard about in Asia quite a long ago. So definitely, and here we're talking about two areas. Number one are political refugees, number one. Number two, we're talking about human trafficking in terms of body trading, that people are actually going and sell part of their bodies, a kidney or whatever. So this is part of it. The most difficult here are the women and children, because you find displacement of women and children all over the place, and not just the Arabs. Again, it's just the Central Africans as well as the Arabs, and the international community, all they can do is just regulate the illegal migration into Europe, but they can't really put a limit to it on the African side, because they have no power to do that. So it is going to have to go back, or it is going back to the North African governments, the Egyptian, Libyan, Tunisian, and Algerians, to do something about it. But they can't.
But doesn't Algeria, for example, say that I've heard them say multiple times that their constitution doesn't permit them to get engaged in cross-border military operations?
That's fine, but at least stop what is happening in terms of illegal migration. But I think the problem is really in Libya itself, because it's a vast land, no security personnel, the borders are wide open. And they basically, people are crossing from Chad, from all over Central Africa into Libya, walk right through to the Mediterranean, crossing with old boats into Europe.
UN says that for the year 2015 alone, I mean, they put the number in terms of revenues made by human traffickers in the billions of dollars.
That's right. That's right.
Very profitable.
There's a lot of money is actually paid on that. And the same thing that you found in Gaza as well. talking about $4 billion in profit just through the Gaza tunnels in terms of goods,
moving goods,
the goods and services, as well as human trafficking.
Yeah.
So it is very difficult, but unfortunately, it's going to have to go back to the actual government themselves to put a stop to that.
Professor, we're almost out of time. One last question. Obviously, we need to think about the future. You've touched on it. You say it's going to take, creating a new culture of a well-informed and literate populace. You said it would take 20 or 30 years. What other prescriptions or solutions do you see for the future?
I think we need some sort of solutions on a short term and long term. On a short term, I think not just political crisis that we're facing in the Middle East, we're talking corruption. And again, corruption is what makes everything. Corruption makes politics bad, makes economics bad, makes society itself bad. So I think number one is combating corruption. And when you reduce corruption, not saying, stop it, reduce corruption, you're going to have a lot of rule of law implemented in there, and this will be coming less. I think we need to focus more on youth. The Arab population, more than 60% are youth, and one of the programs we actually started here in Egypt about 6 months ago, it's called the Second Crossing Campaign for educating the youth in the Arab world, talking about 5 or 6 dimensions of cultural awareness, political, economic, social, as well as security. And here you try to bring people to participate in rule making and bringing peace and stability into the country. This is on a short term. But again, on a long term, this is the difficulty, is you're going to have to combat poverty and basically reduce the amount of brain drain. Because a lot of talented people are leaving the country, and those are the ones that actually have solutions to the crisis we have.
Yes, that is a very good response. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you.
Professor, for joining us, talking about the crisis in Libya. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unite and strengthen the Muslim Ummah to solve all these crises and better protect the Muslims, inshallah. We'll take a short break and come back to have a discussion about Surah Al-Baqarah, inshallah.